So thank you so much for joining us. Feel free in the chat as well to let us know where you're joining us from. We've been really pleased to have very international audiences coming to these webinars. It's been really great to get people together from all over the world to talk about this topic. As I mentioned, this is the fourth of our Project Tier series events. All of the videos of the previous three are available. The videos, there's pre-recorded video for each of these sessions, as well as the discussion video. My name is Will Gawned. I'm the Community Manager at the UK Reproducibility Network. And we're joined today by Richard Ball from Project Tier, Danny Garside from FORRT, and Andy Jones is our main speaker today from Liverpool, John Moores University. And we're really pleased. Hope you've all watched his video on breaking up with SPSS. Can we get students to move away from point and click? That is what we're here to discuss today. But I do want to mention a bit about what the UK Reproducibility Network is and does. So our mission is to improve UK research. And we primarily do that through collaboration. We're a peer-led consortium. We have three kind of member groups, which involve grassroots researchers, institutional, senior academics and managers, as well as stakeholders from the UK research sector. Project Tier is one of our stakeholders, which is why we're glad to work with them on this. And I want to talk a bit about how we define reproducibility at UK Reproducibility Network. Reproducibility is a little bit of a complex term. In some disciplines, it has a very specific meaning, but we use the definition of it being research that is sufficiently transparent so that someone with the relevant expertise can clearly follow what was done, why it was done the way it was done, the evidence that was established, the reasoning and judgments used, and how all of that led justifiably to the research findings and conclusions that were found. We have this very open definition of reproducibility because we want to involve everyone in the UK research sector to share their experiences and to share their best practice so that together we can improve the research culture in the UK. I think that's probably enough talking from me, so I will pass over to Richard Ball to say a few words. So Richard, feel free to take it away.
So I'll be brief, just to, first of all, thank Will and Deanne and all of UKRN for making this possible. Thanks to FORRT for participating and Danny for coming to moderate today, and mainly Andy, thank you very much for a thoughtful, stimulating video presentation, and I'm sure the conversation will reflect the richness of the video. And what I'll mention is a big part of the UKRN that I find very attractive is the network part of it, which is generating connections among people and hopefully fostering ongoing interactions and collaborations and support and resource sharing. And so I hope that this whole symposium this fall is not going to be a one-off event, but I hope it'll generate interest where people will want to continue interacting in other ways. And in fact, the last installment of this 5-part symposium is going to be a discussion where the organizers of the symposium are going to get together and lead a discussion about where can we go from here. And we'll be very interested in hearing from people who are showing up at these webinars to get your points of view. We've got some ideas brewing that we'll share, but mainly or largely we would like to hear from other people about what would support them particularly the focus is on teaching reproducibility in whatever context you might do that. So, so I hope you'll come back in 2 weeks and bring some friends and be prepared to share some ideas of your own about building a community. With that, we'll get on to today's program, and for that, I'll turn it over to Danny Garside.
Hello, everybody. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to set the stage and say a little bit about FORRT. So I'm representing FORRT today, which stands for the Framework for Open and Reproducible Research Training. They provide a pedagogical infrastructure and didactics resources. And the goals are to promote incremental adoption of open science practices. I want to ask you more about this incremental idea later on, Andy. Educate on epistemic uncertainty, reframe open science as inclusive scholarship, and advocate for greater recognition of educational contributions. They also run a replications journal called Replication Research. They maintain an open science glossary. They have a database of lesson plans. They maintain a handbook for replication studies, and that was just the things I could fit on this slide. I say that I'm representing them today. There's 1,500 people are affiliated with FORRT and have contributed to these materials. So I have no elevated status above any of those people, other than I volunteered to say a little bit about FORRT today, just to make it clear that it's very, very much an open door for folks that want to get involved in that project. I'm also the community manager of the Digital Research Academy, which is a network of people delivering quality training for quality research. The big difference there is we have a model where our trainers are paid, in contrast to a lot of other organizations that rely on volunteer labor, which, don't get me wrong, are incredible, but this is a slightly different way of doing things, which we've been doing for the last couple of years. One of the things we do is we organize an event every year called the Open Science Retreat, which is a space for open research advocates to recharge, connect, and think deeply together. So it's an unconference, it's a hackathon, it's a activist networking event, and it's also a retreat. It's an opportunity for people to go on a hike, because most of us are a bit burnt out and need a rest. Applications currently open. Next one is going to be in Wales next April. And I mention that because those are the types of things that are informing my thinking at the moment and inform my interest in what Andy has been kind enough to share with us. Okay, enough from me. With that, I will hand over to Andy, if you would be happy enough to give us a quick summary of your video or the key points. Then I'll ask you a few questions just to get the ball rolling, and then we'll open it up to everybody to ask questions.
Yeah, sounds good. First of all, thanks for Richard, UKRN, Tia, and FORRT for inviting me to this. Very privileged to do it. And this, my presentation, I haven't got any slides, so I'll just recap over a few minutes. It kind of came out of a discussion I had with Richard earlier in the year about how we can teach students to use like script-based programming for analyses rather than SPSS, due to the kind of the well-noted limitations with SPSS. And we decided it'd be an interesting topic to see from my experience as a undergrad psychology lecturer in a big university in the UK, the kind of barriers I've seen throughout my career at teaching research methods and statistics that have come up in getting students to move away from a very comfortable way of analysing data, I think. So the start of my talk was basically setting the scene, and that is that despite the slow shift around open science and reproducibility, SPSS remains the kind of dominant statistics package, mainly through its legacy of being the dominant package for however many years now. But there is a slow shift towards moving towards different packages, mainly non-capitalist free ones like R and Python, and the kind of ones that sit in the middle, such as JASP and Jamovi. And it's not just a shift in the teaching in undergrad psychology courses, it's a shift in what employers want as well. So I've just been in meetings earlier today talking about employability with graduate employers, and a lot of them want things that SPSS just doesn't offer to the same standard as things like R and Python, and things around like nice visualizations, problem solving, coding, them kind of things. But then I went on in the talk to talk about, well, we use SPSS and many places continue to use the SPSS because there is some benefits, and I think the main benefit to students is the GUI, or the graphic user interface, and it works very similar to, you know, most programs that you might use on a computer. It's very similar to Excel in that your data entry and analysis is done in the same package, which doesn't typically happen in R. That being said, more and more often now, my undergraduate students tell me they've got very little experience with Excel anyway, so perhaps that's not the greatest upside anymore. Other benefits, selfishly, it's easier to teach. It's more, if you want a t-test, you can click these three buttons and get a t-test. So that's a selfish benefit. Another selfish benefit is the theory and what you have to do in SPSS to do these statistical tests doesn't change much from year on year. So there's very little in terms of updating slides. I hope no one from my university watches this recording and sees how lazy I am. But that's the nature of it. We're very busy as academics, right? So a big shift in how we do things takes a lot of time, and it's easy to maintain the status quo. The downsides are obviously the cost. So I don't know how much SPSS costs for an individual, but I imagine it costs universities a lot of money for the subscription. I work on other courses, so I help teaching a conversion master's from psychology with a lot of international students, and they decided that they wanted the curriculum for that in R to remove the barrier of students having to pay for things like SPSS and stuff. So that was great. The other downsides I see are it's not very flexible. You can only do what SPSS wants you to do for the most part. It's very slow in terms of updates. So when new things come in, it takes them a while. For instance, effect sizes were only introduced in SPSS in like version 28, so like 3 or 4 years ago. So without that, you'd have had to take your data outside of SPSS and compute these things by hand. There's also a lot of lack of compatibility when you go beyond what I would typically teach for psychology undergraduates. So I used to teach meta-analyses and things like that, and SPSS never used to be able to handle that. And there's lots of other more complicated and intricate procedures, statistical tools that SPSS just isn't made for. So they're the downsides of SPSS, and this is the next thing I spoke about was what does R offer over and above SPSS, R or Python, and the big one for me, I think, beyond reproducibility, which I know is kind of the main focus of these things, is employability. So I provided a couple of examples of in my old undergraduate slides, I used to say, well, research methods and statistics is very important, which psychology students don't really know about in the first couple of weeks of their course. But it leads to one of the biggest transferable skills outside of psychology. And when you used to look at graduate jobs, a lot of them had things like experience with SPSS. That has all since disappeared. So I gave a couple of examples in the talk about, I think it's the UK government now don't ask for SPSS as a skill anymore. They're all about R. So they use R as their kind of statistical package, or if you work for the government, a lot of your training is in R. So in terms of employability, continuing to use SPSS is probably not as beneficial for students as moving to one of these programming languages. The other one is obviously reproducibility. It integrates well with things like the Open Science Framework. You can share code. I give a couple of examples of a lot of students don't realize, but SPSS does run script-based language in the background through syntax. And if you look at the content of the syntax, it's actually a lot more complicated than our syntax to do the same functions, which is again probably a benefit of using the user interface. What was I going to talk about then? Another massive benefit I think is not specifically psychology related, but it's so much better with things like visualizations. And if you're talking about employability and moving outside of psychology, because realistically, a lot of psychology students don't land jobs in psychology, right? Because it's such a massive and broad scope subject. I think it's like 10% of psychology students remain in kind of the psychology area. Lots of them go into marketing, lots of them go into things like government work. The visualizations you can get from things like R is so much better. And I gave a couple of examples of people using R to recreate visualizations you see in like newspapers and stuff. And to me, as someone who's trying to get people jobs at the end of their degree, is a real big deal. What else? I mentioned some things about, again, selfishly, why, all right, it's easier for me to teach in SPSS, but some of the quality of teaching can be massively improved in art, like using GIFs. So you can see the example on my slides of showing how distributions look more normally with larger participants. For me, simulating data to use in examples and to use in assessments is so much easier in R than things like SPSS. In the past, I used to try and simulate some normal data for students to do a t-test, and I don't know if you've ever tried to create normal data by just typing numbers in Excel, but it will take you a long time. Um, you can do it in R with a line of code very, very quickly. And a lot of this came from, and my talk came from, I was asked by a colleague to help write a book about basically a practical guide of how to do analyses in SPSS and R. And it come about because I guess I would probably not be using R if it wasn't for COVID. And the reason being is lockdown worked out pretty well for me in that I didn't have a toddler running around the house. I got some time, and I think that's the biggest issue with R is the learning curve for doing the simple things in SPSS that will take you a couple of minutes. So we started speaking about what would be great is a book that shows an example in SPSS and then shows the same example in R, and then for students who want to learn R, they can see it in a software package that they're familiar with, SPSS, and then see how to recreate that same thing in R. And often with a smaller number of steps, or it's easier than it actually looks because you're not clicking some command boxes, you're typing a few lines of code in. So I think that was everything I wanted to cover. Have I spent enough time doing it, or have I
A
overshot?
perfect amount of time.
Excellent.
Do not worry too much.
Nice.
That was a lovely summary. Thank you. And I really enjoyed watching your presentation, and I loved some of the examples that you gave, like the New York Times reproduction blog and tutorial. I thought that was a really nice way to get students on board.
Yep.
I've been trying to organize my thoughts into some coherent questions to kind of get the ball rolling, and I think one of the things that I spent a lot of time thinking about was how we actually have this two-dimensional choice of whether we're teaching software that has a GUI interface or a command line interface, and also whether we're teaching software that is run by capitalist organizations or not.
Yeah.
Normally that would be open source would be the alternative to that capitalist nature. So I think we conflate those because quite often the open source software is leaning to, or it has more so in the past, lent towards command line interfaces. And now we have, over the last few years, we have a few options like JASP, which now provide this GUI interface, or what was the other one that you mentioned I hadn't heard of before?
Movi.
I really like the idea that provided both the code and the GUI. That seemed like a really nice way to go. And I was wondering if you had an opinion on if we, now that we have both of those options in the open source world, do you have a personal preference or a recommendation on where people should be starting now that we don't have to conflate free?
I think both JASP and Jamovi are like really excellent tools. Personally, I like Jamovi a little bit more because I think at the moment it offers just increased scope of things. It's got modules that you can add on. Similar to the way R has packages you can add on to do specific things. I think Jamovi's got the same thing. I like that it shows you the code as well, and you can copy that code into R and mess around with it as a learning tool to see what that code does and how it works. So actually, my the talk should just be anything other than SPSS, and that's largely because the longer I've not used SPSS, I haven't missed it at all. And now when I have to go back and teach it to undergrads, I look at it in a different way with how like inefficient it can be, and opening a big data file in SPSS, you can go and make a cup of coffee and come back and it not be open, which is not a bad thing, right? Because sometimes you need a cup of coffee, but um, it's I just find it largely inefficient. I actually had experience with JASP before moving to R, and it was mainly because I became interested in doing some Bayesian analyses, and I thought I've got to teach myself Bayesian. I also don't want to have to teach myself command line interface at the same time. And actually, JASP was a great middle ground that didn't require me to basically learn a whole new software package to implement one specific analysis. So
Yeah, totally.
my first experience was with JASP. But even now, JASP's visualizations are so much better than SPSS as it offers things like rain cloud plots and things like that. So yeah, I don't know whether I answered your question, and I just got excited talking about Jaspin and Jamovi for a little bit.
That's great. Love it. Love it. I think the thing that I find myself thinking is it's all about meeting people, students, learners where they are. And if, as you said in your talk, if folks are particularly familiar with GUIs, then that's going to be less of a steep learning curve, as you said, like learning less things simultaneously.
Yeah.
I find myself wondering where the future of that is. What in 5 years' time our students are going to be coming with, whether it's going to be much more normal to interact with computers in natural language, or even with voice commands. I know one of the trainers in the Digital Research Academy has been preparing a course recently on essentially doing stats with LLMs. And of course, don't worry, there's massive concerns with that and massive caveats. And the course takes very much a harm reduction and education approach. But I'm kind of fascinated to think, what are the students of 5 years' time going to be coming with? Like current students, I remember a few years ago, lecturers were telling me, the students don't know what a file system is anymore. They don't know what folders are because they upload things to Google Drive and then just use keyword search.
Yeah.
That's their experience. What is the LLM version of that, do you think?
I would be interested to know what the people in this chat think about LLMs in terms of learning and potentially teaching stats. But your wider point is, yes, I teach and like first year undergrads research methods and statistics, and they're all coming to me at very different stages, but also different knowledge around computers. Knowledge that like someone who has grown up with desktops and laptops, I take for granted. So things like I mentioned before, but a lot of students are now coming not knowing too much about Excel, which to me is surprising. But actually, if they're in classrooms, they've been taught iPads and stuff where Excel is very clunky, doesn't work very well, and if they've not come from a background where they've not had to do any data analysis, then it's not that surprising. So, um, getting them up to speed on the kind of some more basic computer literacy before even introducing something like SPSS now is important. In terms of LLMs, I'm terrified that I'm going to be out of a job in a couple of years. I'm also very frustrated. I learned before these things came along. Um, but saying that, there's been times where I've asked an LLM to help me debug, and it's just given me nonsense. Um, and the thing that is frustrating is it'll double down on its nonsense. So I'm very wary at using them in the teaching space, because even at the moment they get simple things wrong, and we shouldn't be getting students to rely on them. So I mean, I don't know in 5 years, because even the emergence of things like ChatGPT and Copart and stuff, that has happened very quickly. So the landscape might look completely different again in 5 years' time. And maybe we'll be playing catch up. So
Maybe
I
I
really don't know where we're going to be.
I like to think that maybe people in the room, or maybe our extended networks, there's somebody out there going, okay, proactively, how can I build a tool that uses these features in a way that maximizes reliability, maximizes safety?
Mm.
But that would require a fundamental change with the way that LLMs are currently trained. A friend of mine recently pointed out that LLMs hallucinate, they spit out garbage because the odds of any random answer being the correct answer is slightly higher than the odds of I don't know being the correct answer. Like from the LLM's perspective, I don't know is never the upweighted response. And so I think we're gonna have to see that be implemented before we can start taking LLMs seriously.
Yeah. The stats book, kind of the majority of it was written before ChatGPT became a big thing, but we had to add a paragraph into it, and one of my paragraphs was, these things hallucinate and will give you sometimes, particularly if you're naive, a convincing answer. It might be convincing to you, but it could well be wrong. And actually, the second we start talking about computers hallucinating, we should probably shut them down and just go and make a cup of coffee and come back to them a little bit later, because it's terrifying.
Back to the woods.
Yep.
Yes, okay. I could chat about this stuff all day, and so I think now's a great time to open this out to the rest of the group. We do have one question in the chat, which I can start with. But then if anybody after that is excited about going on camera and using voices, we can do that as well. Chat is absolutely fine as well. I'll just read this one out just in case there's anybody that isn't able to read the chat at the moment. Sarah Lawrence says, I really enjoyed the presentation. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I have a couple of questions. One, I think you mentioned in your presentation that you have previously taught R to Access/Foundation students. Is that correct? And if so, what is your experience? How did you adapt to your teaching? Number two, my second question is about asynchronous teaching and whether this is something you have tried with R.
So I have taught R2. They are MSc conversion students, so it'll be students who want to do MSc psychology. So they'll often come having done a degree in something not related to psychology. And actually didn't find it too bad because it was a psychology conversion. I wasn't teaching anything like particularly complex. A lot of it was around, um, normality testing, creating descriptives, and then basic linear models. They picked it up quicker than I thought, and I think I mentioned this in the talk, is if you don't offer students the option, then they've kind of got to use R as opposed to, but whereas if you present R side by side with SPSS, and they're either very statistically anxious or are not planning to consider, data manipulation, data analysis as part of their employment, they'll pick a user interface 90% of the time. Whereas if you remove that option and they don't know about SPSS, they actually just embraced it. And I was pleasantly surprised. And I think if we wanted to have this big shift away from SPSS, then the thing to do would be to never introduce students to SPSS. The difficulty I'm finding with um, trying to get my current department to move is not so much the students, it's the staff, the staff who've been using SPSS for 20 years and they don't want to learn off to help like with dissertations and stuff like that. And then it's kind of not fair on the students if you teach them R for 3 years and they go to a dissertation supervisor who then says, well, actually, I need to do this in SPSS. So yeah, I just throwing students straight in at the deep end, I think, and not introducing them to SPSS is it worked well in my experience. There was a second part to that question which I can't see. Sorry.
It says it's about asynchronous teaching. Is this
Yeah,
something that you've tried with that?
yeah. So as part of this master's conversion, I was I basically wrote the module on data analysis and developed some lecture casts that students watch in their own time. And it's watching them back, it's a little bit awkward because you can hear me hammering on the keyboard, typing out code. Um, but it does work. And not only do you can do that, but you can also provide the kind of R scripts where they can open it themselves, choose which line of code to run, and see what it does type thing. Because I think the steep learning curve can be somewhat less steepened. I don't know what the phrase is, but by having pre-existing code and trying to use it with your data to see what lines of code works. Rather from starting from a blank template, if you can have something that works, and see how it works, I think that makes life much easier. And that's kind of how I decided to approach my learning with like command line, was looking on open science and seeing people's data, seeing people's shared code, running it, seeing what it does, and then trying to adapt it for my own. I didn't like start from a blank R script and start typing. It was a copy and paste job, amend when necessary, see what happens. Why is this broken? Okay, need to Google it, which now most people will chat GTP here, but yeah.
Yeah, totally. I think this question of how do we best what was the word you came up with? I couldn't think of a better one. Unsteepen the learning curve. I think that's an absolutely great question. I'm also interested in how we make that learning curve less steep later on in people's involvement in open source software. Once they're proficient with it, how do we make it easy to then be like, oh, I'm going to tweak it, I'm going to modify it, I'm going to add this new functionality to it.
Yeah.
But maybe let's talk about that in a couple of years once we're what's with that? Okay, the next question that we have, are there ways that you can suggest to encourage or require students using Jamovi to engage with the R code underneath to bridge the gap between interface and coding? I'm concerned that Jamovi is still very point and click and may only offer employability benefits over SPSS if they actually engage with the coding somehow. That's from Hannah Gilman. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a discussion we've been having recently as well about there's a big employability is a big deal, but some students are just not that interested in, particularly in psychology, with the data analysis. They see it as a means to an end and don't think they'll use it after, and that's absolutely fine. Like, so what we're considering at the moment is an elective module in the final year where we use something like Jamovi or Jasper and we move them away from SPSS for the students that are interested in it, because they can see the benefits it has for employability. I think that is perhaps the downside of things like Jamovi and Jasp for students who aren't that engaged or who have statistics anxiety or don't think they'll be using it after their degree, is what's the benefit. And there was a few quotes in my talk from, I can't remember what they were, but it was essentially, if they don't plan to engage with statistics a lot, there is no real benefit of that massive learning curve when you could use a much easier tool to get the job done. So my answer is I don't know how we can get all students on board, but the ones who are engaged, I think, would making it elective and tailoring like a module or something to them where you can say, okay, this is how it happens in Jamovi. Let's take the R code out, or let's try and recreate what Jamovi does in R. And you can see how the code works. Write your own code. Does it look like Jamovi's? What's the difference? Could you have made the code more efficient and things like that? So it would be, we've tried to frame it as a, da- a data science module within a psychology course. So it'd be more optional for those who want it, because I don't think you can maybe force it on all students. The only way you can force it on all students is just not introduce them to the GUIs in the first place, I guess.
I think it's always going to depend on your context, isn't it? I think, as we said before about meeting students where they are, like if throwing a command line interface at somebody is going to be like, oh, okay, I quit, I'm done, then we've got to find a gentler way to do that.
I think it worked well in the MSc conversion course because students have already been through a degree and understand the learning requirements of a degree, and they are mature students, right? Because they've already been through a degree, so they understand a little bit more about the importance of things like employability, perhaps. I'm not selling our current like 18-year-old undergraduate short, but often when you speak to them, employability is not the first thing on the mind in the first year, and yet we're trying to.
Oh, it looks like we've lost our speaker. The joys of remote internet events.
We
Okay.
will give him a moment to return, I guess. I dropped out of the call very briefly in the middle as well. So just one of those days, I guess.
If we have a little break, I'd like to ask a question that maybe people here, and Andy would know, but maybe other people here would know. It's just really sort of for information, because I'm not that familiar with JASP and Jamovi. Oh, so Andy's back.
Hey, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened.
It's all right. Welcome back.
So Andy, while you were gone, I just thought that I'd ask a question that I thought maybe even if you weren't here, others here could answer, but maybe you could answer it also. It's just sort of a point of information question, since I'm not really familiar with JASP and Jamovi. So for each one, I have this question. So do you interact through a GUI, or is it like writing code? And maybe the answer is both, kind of like SPSS in principle is both. Although in fact, like with SPSS, the dominant practice is the GUI.
Yeah.
So for JASP and then separately for Jamovi, does it have both capabilities, a GUI and code? And if it has both, which is the dominant practice typically?
I haven't used Jasp in a while, but I know it runs. I think both Jasp and Jamovi run R in the background, but present a nice package over to on top. When you open them, it's very much focused towards the GUI interface, right? Um, I'm sure you can get the R code to Jasp, but it's not um obvious. Whereas I think when you open Jamovi now, if you click through the like command boxes and stuff, you will see the R code get populated next to the output. I could be wrong, because I haven't looked at them in a while and they're constantly being updated. But that's my most recent experience with them. Someone might be able to correct me if they've used it a bit more recently.
So it seems it so so they then they look like useful tools, but they're not going to get you all the way to like doing a reproducible project where you save scripts that somebody else can run and reproduce your work.
No, but you can save your project, I think, in Jamovi, and it'll basically just save all the output and the steps you made. And in the same way you can, in theory, you can save your SPSS syntax, right?
Yeah,
And it'll do the same thing.
great. Okay, thank you.
So we're reaching the end of this session slowly. So I do want to encourage people, if you've got a question that you are thinking about asking, please do pipe up and ask it. I'm just summarizing the additional comments in the chat. We've got some thank yous, folks feeling inspired. We've got a recommendation to check out PSPP, and some conversation following on from there. And then it looks like Hannah Gilman has a contribution to the conversation you folks were just having. Jamovi has an option to give you the R code, but more as an output. I've not looked extensively, but doesn't look like it accepts R code being typed in. Interesting. Yep.
Could I ask just one more question? And I'm curious what Andy thinks about this. It's the fact that with R, there's 3 ways to do anything you want to do.
At least.
Right? At least you can do base R, or do you use tidyverse, or what have you. And that's a issue that doesn't get talked about that much, but it seems, if you're thinking about introducing in a curriculum and having students learn, there's a risk that everybody who's teaching them will take a different approach, and I just wonder if that's something that you've grappled with or thought about.
I thought it was one of the most frustrating things when trying to teach yourself R and looking for guidance is that there's 10 different ways to do the same function or whatever. In terms of getting the issue I find is our cohorts are so big. So I will give a lecture on the kind of theory behind the statistical test we're using, and then students will go into a practical. And then I don't give every practical because there's so many of them. So you kind of have to get all the staff on the same page and doing it the same way. And I think that's why we're still at SPSS, because of the issues with everyone could do it in a slightly different way, and then not everyone, when we bring them back at the end, students are using different techniques to do the same thing. I don't, if the technique works, then it's not a problem, right? But it can create confusion. And I guess, yeah, that is one of I think that's one of the big downsides I noted about R in line with the learning curve is its upside is it's got massive flexibility. Its downside is you can do the same thing in 50 different ways.
Yeah.
Even simple things like calculating a mean, though, the amount of different ways you can do that when, I mean, but actually you can get a mean from like 4 different command boxes in SPSS as well. So
Just picking up on Hannah Gilman's comment from before, they say, oh, sorry, I'm thinking of Helen Faulkner's comment. It has inspired me to try and convince my colleagues to start thinking of using Jamovi small steps, but a move towards getting our students skills that are more future employability focused. And just thinking about this concept that I've enjoyed for the last few years of the open science smorgasbord. So this is the idea that there are hundreds of different things that you can do to make your research more open, more reproducible. And if you try and do all of them at the same time, I should probably say a smorgasbord is just a Scandinavian buffet, as far as I'm concerned. I've probably offended some Scandinavians here, but that's my understanding. Buffet is a synonym for me. But you don't have to do all of it at once. And in fact, it's a pretty bad idea to try and do everything at once, and that it's much more sustainable to try and pick one thing at a time where we're all learning, and we're just on this project, I'll try and pick up this thing. On the next project, I'll try and pick up this next thing. And I think that's the sustainable way to go about opening up our science, I think.
yeah, 100%. Like, I think I really like that metaphor for the open science buffet because it's not a binary all or nothing approach, right? You're not open or closed. It's can you take steps to improve the transparency of your work? And you can pick one thing to focus on to improve, and then at some point that just becomes the norm for you, and you don't need to think about as much, and then you maybe pick the second one. So maybe you start by pre-registering your research, and then every new project you start, it's kind of like given that you'll pre-register it. And you're not using all your like, kind of cognitive bandwidth to think about pre-registration because you've got to that point now and you're familiar with it. Then you move on to like sharing data, sharing code, and setting up the kind of infrastructure you need for that. So yeah, I'm a big fan of framing it like a buffet because it doesn't put people off engaging with open science where they think they have to jump in and everything needs to be open because it can't work like that. And particularly for students who research methods and statistics is like 40 credits of their 120 credit year. They can't deal with all that stuff on top of all the kind of theories around psychology and stuff that they're interested in. So small steps, and it's probably small steps in terms of learning. Or I went about it the wrong way, and like I said, when I had more time in COVID, I just said, okay, the next paper I write is going to be done completely in R. Luckily, it was a relatively simple paper, but it took me a lot longer than to get that paper written and published than it would have had I just continued using SPSS.
Fantastic. Okay. This is my final call for questions. Otherwise, we'll move into the wrapping up stage. Just while I give a moment for anybody to have any final words, I want to thank all of the folks who have asked questions. It's been great. I'm yeah, really grateful that everybody is here and everybody is excited and engaged in this. I think it's really important, and I'm so happy that Andy was able to tell us about their experiences with it, and we could think about what we need to do next, what the challenge is going to be. Fantastic. Andy, do you have any final thoughts? A nice wrapping up sentiment for us to take away, or an ask, a proposition, something controversial to send us away with?
No, you put me on the spot. I don't think I've
Very
got
much so.
any.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Nothing controversial. Sometimes I feel like I can be quite annoying, like extolling the benefits of R over something like SPSS, particularly when I would definitely still be using SPSS if I didn't have that big period of time, and I think that's a lot what it comes down to. So if you, for people who are listening who maybe feel guilty that they don't use R yet or don't teach their students to use R yet, don't, because it's not something you can do quickly. It takes a while to implement it. So I just want to say, while I've tried to show the potential benefits and downsides of it, the point is any statistical tool that works, and some will have different benefits to others. So yeah, don't beat yourself up if you're not using R, because SPSS does work fine and gives you the opportunity to get a cup of coffee if you've got to open a big data file.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, I'm just putting in the chat a link to the next session, the final session of this series. So this is going to be on November the 6th, and this is going to be a discussion session, as Richard mentioned earlier, trying to work out together how we capitalize on the momentum of this series, how we go forwards to support the community of people that are providing this teaching, providing this training. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to that, Richard?
No, I think you put it well. But we're eager to have people's input, and it's really now we have a number of ideas that we want to talk about, but really we would like to hear from other people what their views are. So we're exploring. We hope to just learn and discover. So please come help us do that.
Fantastic. Maybe a final little question for folks to put in the chat just as we're signing off. What communities are you part of that intersect with this one? I know I've mentioned the Turing Way. I'm representing FORRT. We've got UKRN in the room. We've got Project Tier. What other communities are within this ecosystem? And I will also say thank you to all of the organizers, to Andy, and to everybody that joined.
Thank you. And yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Andy. It is great that one of our local network leads of UKRN is one of the speakers with this call as well. And again, to reiterate everything, all the thanks for joining us, and the encouragement to engage with us, to talk to us, and to see how we can work on this together. UKRN is all about collaborating. You know, we want to do cultural shifts in research, and cultural shifts take time and effort. And it is hard sometimes to imagine how we can make big changes to culture. But all those big changes start with small changes, and conversations with each other is one of the smallest and easiest ways that you can kind of start those big changes. So thank you everyone for engaging in this conversation. This recording will be released within the next week or so. So if you have joined us via YouTube, feel free to reach out to us as well.